Thank you, Trevor. And as Trevor said, my name is Deon Rossouw. I'm the CEO of the Ethics Institute, who's a co-host of this event. I'll tell you a bit more about the other co-host of this event a bit later. It gives me great pleasure to welcome people who registered from more than 20 countries for this webinar this morning. And that include countries right across the African continent, but also from the USA, from UK, and even from Ukraine. So quite an international audience that we have this morning. But then we are also most grateful that a number of organizations who play a very important role in promoting whistleblowing but also protecting whistleblowers are also present here this morning. And they include the Whistleblowing International Network, Transparency International, Corruption Watch, the Independent Anti-Corruption Commission of Somalia, as well as the support to anti-corruption champion institutions in Ukraine. So welcome to all of you, and I really hope that you will use this opportunity to not only learn from our panel, but also to interact with our panel. And as Trevor already invited you to do, please make use of the Q&A in order to pose questions that you want our esteemed panel to respond to. The event is co-hosted by the Ethics Institute and Whistleblower House. Now, the Ethics Institute was established in the year 2000 already, and it's an independent institute to focus on organizational ethics and the building of ethical culture in organizations. And we do this through thought leadership, through training, through products and services that we make available to organizations in both the public and the private sector, as well as in state-owned enterprises and professional associations. And we are delighted to also welcome a few of the non-executive directors of the Ethics Institute who are present here this morning, Mr. Mohammed Adam, Professor Divya Singh, Professor Arnold Smith, and Mr. Fulvio Tunelli. So a warm word of welcome to our directors as well. The co-host is the Whistleblower House. It's another independent non-profit organization who was established recently in 2021, and they focus on providing a holistic service to whistleblowers that include legal, psychological, security, financial services that they give people access to, as well as with the conducting of risk assessments for whistleblowers. Now, moving closer to, and once again, I think just about all the directors, as well as the executive director of the Whistleblower House, are present here this morning, but a special word of welcome to Mr. Ivan Pillay, who is the chair of the Whistleblower House, and he will also do the closing at the end of the webinar. But let's start zooming in this Zoom meeting on the theme of this webinar, which is snitches get stitches and end up in ditches. Now, I think we all know that whistleblowing is a very important mechanism that we have to expose wrongdoing in organizations. And although the literature on whistleblowing abound with definitions and very different and sometimes even conflicting definitions of who a whistleblower is, I think we can work with a sort of rough and ready definition of a whistleblower as someone who reports wrongdoing to either a person or body that he or she thinks can do something about the wrongdoing that they report. However, we also know that organizations do react very differently to these messages, these reports that they get from whistleblowers. In some cases, organizations react quite constructively, and they listen to what whistleblowers bring to their attention, and they correct that. But very often, we don't hear about these instances because there's nothing spectacular to report here. And these whistleblowers who find a constructive response in the body or the person to whom they report that, those whistleblowers often remain beneath the radar, and we don't hear about them, and often we don't even think of them as whistleblowers. However, we also know that there's a very different and a very destructive response that whistleblowers often receive. And that is where, instead of listening to the message, the messenger gets shot, and sometimes also literally shot. We are only too aware of the victimization that whistleblowers often suffer. And very often our association with whistleblowers are these people who are tragically affected by their courage to bring wrongdoing to the attention of their organizations. So the whole purpose of this webinar this morning is to look at how can we create organizational cultures where it is safe for people to report wrongdoing and where whistleblowers are actually appreciated for their contribution to transparency and accountability in their organizations instead of being victimized. And we will do so by having a panel conversation about the theme of this webinar this morning, which, as you know now, is Snitches get stitches and end up in ditches. We unfortunately had to make one change to our panel because of a whistleblower who is no longer available to participate, but I will leave it to the moderator of the panel discussion to tell you a bit more about that, and also about another very prominent whistleblower who was willing to step in at fairly short notice. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague from the Ethics Institute, but also a founding director of the Whistleblower House, Dr. Liesel Groenewald, to tell us more about a panel and also to lead the panel conversation. But let me just very briefly introduce you to Liesel. Liesel is a senior manager at the Ethics Institute, and she is our resident expert also on whistleblowing, because that is one of the areas on which we focus as part of our focus on organizational ethics. She is the author of several publications on whistleblowing, including the Whistleblowing Management Handbook. And that handbook, by the way, is available on the website of the Ethics Institute. You can go there and download a copy for free. And then Liesel also contributed internationally to the drafting of the ISO 37002 standards on whistleblowing management systems. So I think someone who is really well qualified to lead this panel, but also to make a very substantial contribution to the topic that we will discuss this morning. So Liesel, I know you find yourself in Botswana this morning, in Gaborone. So from Pretoria, a warm welcome to you there in Gaborone, and we look forward to your panel conversation.
Thank you very much, Deon, for the introductory remarks and introducing me. And yes, greetings everyone from Gaborone, Botswana. And I welcome you all globally to this discussion today. As Deon has indicated, Jóhannes Stefánsson, who the so-called fish rot whistleblower, is unable to join us today, and he has sent a message saying that I have and I am very limited and my ability is basically zero. I'm so sorry I cannot participate and not send a video. So Jóhannes is really sick. Yeah, he's just not able and doesn't have the energy to join us today. So let's just keep him in our thoughts and hope he feels better soon. So I want to thank Johan van Logrenberg for not being Plan F, Johan, as he has indicated this morning, but Plan B. Thank you so much for coming in at such a late stage or being willing to. Let me introduce my panelists. I have Johan van Logrenberg here today, Ben Tron, and Lula Matabaka. Johan is the former group executive at the South African Revenue Service, where he worked for 16 years. After he blew the whistle on fraud and corruption, he was suspended and eventually resigned in 2014 by mutual agreement. Johan testified at, amongst others, the Zondo Commission on State Capture in South Africa, and a Section 194 inquiry into the South African Public Protector, her fitness to hold office. Since 2015, he has been a practicing tax and customs advisor, a tax practitioner, an internationally registered conflict negotiator and mediator, member of various groups of civil society bodies. He remains an ongoing witness and complainant in an Inspector General of Intelligence case, and is a potential witness in a number of state capture-related prosecutions. Johan is the author of, amongst others, the following books: Rogue, the inside story of SARS's elite crime-busting unit; Tobacco Wars, inside the spy games and dirty tricks of Southern Africa's cigarette trade; Cop Undercover, My Life in the Shadows with Drug Lords, Robbers and Smugglers; Death and Taxes, How SARS Made Hitmen, Drug Dealers and Tax Dodgers Pay Their Duties. And lastly, he holds a LLB, a law degree, and a postgraduate certificate in business management. My second panelist is Ben Tron. Ben is the CEO of the Whistleblower House and a certified fraud examiner, as well as a seasoned operations executive with 30 years experience. He holds an MBA from the University of Pretoria and has extensive experience in telecommunications, electronic tolling, and forensic investigations. A few highlights in Ben's career include the design and building of the Gauteng freeway tolling system in South Africa, refocusing the organization Undoing Tax Abuse into a powerful anti-corruption fighting and lobby group with sustainable funding, establishing an anti-corruption branch in the Department of Public Enterprises, and re-engineering and repositioning the Eskom, South Africa's power utility, their forensic investigations unit, to conclude sensitive and critical investigations. And our third panelist is from the Ethics Institute, my colleague Lulama Kabaka. Lulama was employed at the Armaments Corporation of South Africa from 2016 to 2020 as a compliance and risk officer. During this time, he was tasked with implementing ethics in the organization, as well as the anti-bribery management system, aligned with ISO 37001. These activities led him to conducting ethics training for employees, drafting ethics-related documents such as the Code of Conduct, fraud risk plans, as well as being involved in managing the whistleblowing hotline. He joined the Ethics Institute during COVID in February 2020 as an ethics and anti-corruption specialist, and he is our subject matter expert for state-owned entities. His role includes advising state-owned entities on ethics-related matters, conducting and compiling ethics risk assessments, and conducting ethics training for all levels across the organization. Lulama is a certified ethics officer, has a BCom law qualification, and is part of the Ethics Institute's faculty for the Ethics Officer Certification Program. And to add to his colorful personality, Lulama was a stand-up comedian in his previous life. Quite a mouthful, and you can hear that our panelists are really distinguished people who bring a lot to the table today from different angles so that we can focus on how to get our so-called snitches, or prevent that our snitches get stitches and that they don't end up in ditches. Johan, if you can please put on your camera so that I can start with you. Johan, according to media records, you blew the whistle in 2015. But I've heard, or you told me that you actually blew the whistle much earlier than that. and that it only came to the fore in the media in 2015. Won't you enlighten our audience, please, about what you blew the whistle on and how the process unfolded?
Hello to everybody, and thank you for the opportunity. Well, Liesl, let me say this. To try and summarize it in the 10 minutes that you said we have is going to be extremely difficult. But in a nutshell, if I have to describe it very briefly, I commenced with making disclosures to persons in authority towards December 2010 already, and in subsequent years, so in 2011, 12, 13, 14. And it really concerned a myriad of overlapping activities that concerned corporates, certain powerful individuals that had political connections, and in the main, our state intelligence agency. But none of these disclosures were ever really acted upon. In fact, they were quashed. And I think in part that's the reason why it's not commonly known that I had begun to make these disclosures as far back as 2010. What really brought it into the public domain, I think, was that in 2014, somebody who I had dated briefly and had ended the relationship with flipped the tables on me. And how that happened was that towards end of 2014, one of the disclosures I did on instruction of my employer to the media. And this resulted in a media article in August of 2014 that exposed certain dirty tricks, if I can use that common term, to undermine our prosecuting authority, our police service, and the revenue service. Interestingly enough, over the weekend, I tried to find that article, which was a prominent article in the front page of a Sunday paper, and it had disappeared. It's nowhere available online. In fact, all traces of these things have disappeared. I think I became more publicly known as a result of those events, because what then happened was that there were a number of, let me call them one-sided inquiries, who didn't hear me or didn't afford me a hearing, listened to the bad guys, accepted what the bad guys said as is, and as I said, turned the tables on me, and ultimately that became a pretext for a whole number of other enemies of the revenue service to not only quash what I had to say, but also use it to their advantage to ultimately capture the revenue service and get rid of a whole lot of other people. So it got a life of its own. And then in the post-2015 years, by the way, I resigned in 2015, not 2014, I probably became more publicly known as a result of my testimony at the State Capture Commission, my testimony at a commission of inquiry at the Revenue Service, and then, as you said, at the Parliamentary Committee recently in 2022. But at the same time, parallel to that, the continuous hounding of myself and others continued through the use of or abuse of the media and a whole lot of other platforms. And so for pretty much the last decade, I had spent a significant amount of time and effort together with other people in fighting the counterattack and the attempts to smear us, which succeeded by and large, falsely so, on various platforms. And then that was pretty much the last 9 years of my life. And every single time these things saw sunshine, of course, the truth surfaced. So that's how I would summarize it in a nutshell.
Yes, thank you, Johan. That was really a nutshell. But we will come back to some of what you have said, definitely. Thank you so much. Let me move over to Ben Tron, the CEO of the Whistleblower House. Ben, Johan has not really touched on the detriments yet. I am going to ask him about the detriments and the consequences of his whistleblowing. But we hear about this also from other whistleblowers, and that is also one of the reasons why Jóhannes Stefánsson can't be here today, of course. So, but there are continuous calls for people to inform their organizations or the public about the observed wrongdoing, because if you don't know what is wrong, you cannot fix it. So what I want to know from you is, from the Whistleblower House side, as you have experienced over the last year or two, what are the benefits of whistleblowing? Are there any benefits? Why do we need whistleblowers? Not just in organizations, but society in general. I know there's a quote from Johan that I have in one of my handbooks, where he says the world needs whistleblowers. Do you agree with that? Please give us just some background information in that regard.
Thank you for the opportunity. Unemphatically, yes, the world needs whistleblowers. And as I go through a few slides that I put together, I think it's not only myself that thinks so, but also very learned people in this country and internationally. But I need to start off just by sharing what we as Whistleblower House have accepted as a definition, because it's important that we understand what we regard as a whistleblower. And that is a person who in good faith, report wrongdoing in an organization to someone they believe will take action to address it. So there's a couple of factors in there that need to be understood. So it is good faith in an organization, and the person that you report to ought to be able to assist in that. Then I thought, let's just quickly look, because we're based in South Africa, and we always think that the world revolve around us, and whistleblowers only in South Africa. It is not. But I thought, let me just put some examples up. So the panel, the audience is international. So I thought, let me just share some examples of that. In 2015, SARS, Bain, Athol Williams, 217 million is what was mentioned in the press. He resigned, and then he moved into exile, and he's still in exile today. Trillion, Bianca Goodson, 1.6 billion was repaid to Eskom because of that revelation and the work that's been done since then. She's resigned, and for a very long time she couldn't find work. She is now employed, and I think she's starting to rebuild her life. SAA 2016, South African Airways, Cynthia Stimple. The value that we talk about generally is 250 million that you say, but the real value is 20 billion, which was involved in the purchase of the aircraft. She is now my colleague in Whistleblower House, and we try to make a difference in the lives of whistleblowers. PRASA 2017, Martha Ngoy, 2.5 billion is the contest in dispute. Been to court a number of times. She's still fighting on a day-to-day basis. She's suspended, and she's in court a lot of the times. Let me pause. The Department of Health, 2021, Babita Deon, 850 million she identified 850 million in transactions. She was murdered, and I think tomorrow, if I'm not wrong, tomorrow or Wednesday is the anniversary of the death 2 years ago. And I think we should just pause there to say, when people land up in ditches, we have many of them, and we need to remember people like Babita, who have paid the ultimate price towards this, and they should not be forgotten. Quite the opposite, they should be celebrated. I thought, let's go international. From 1974, it's not a new thing. In 1974, Karen Silkwood, the Kerr-McGee nuclear plant, people were exposed to radiation, they died, she was murdered. In 1990, Environmental Protection Agency in America, William Marcus, he was dismissed. Pacific Gas and Electric Company, Aaron Brockovich, She was fired. She was threatened with her life. She became a well-known presenter for a series of magazine series. And she started her own organization called Brockovich Research and Consulting. 2013, Edwin Snowden. He's in exile in Russia. Sorry, there's a duplication. I didn't pick it up. The Mauritius government in COVID. Supramanin Kirsten, he was murdered. The DRC International Money Laundering, Gradi Koko Lobanga and Navy Malela, they were in exile and they were sentenced to death in absence. So they are still running and still hiding. And these people made a difference in their lives, in our lives on a day-to-day basis, and they've exposed corruption where they were. What do whistleblowers go through? And you asked me the question and Johan started talking, and if you hear from 2010, 2015, he resigned, until today. Johan is doing freelance work, etc. But the things that I speak about here are things that people like Johan, people like Bianca, Martha go through on a day-to-day basis. Whistleblowers report malfeasance, and unintentionally they become, without, there are exceptions to the rule, they become outcasts. They face civil and criminal persecution, and they get hounded. Loss of employment, defamation, ostracization, and isolation, and they have extreme difficulty in actually finding jobs because of that stigma attached to this being a whistleblower. They experience post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression. All too often, this is coupled with financial ruin, death threats, and as I just spoken about Babita, even assassination. Let me talk about the value. Let's start there. Chief Justice, the highest legal person in our country, custodian of law and order, and the justice environment. The Commission has heard a lot of evidence from whistleblowers. If we do not look after these whistleblowers during state capture, they won't be around next time. Others will look at how we treat whistleblowers, and they will not come forward. A lot of people are reporting corruption. That was 3 or 4 years ago when the Zondo Commission going on. Here is the clause that I want to highlight. The whistleblower is one of the most effective weapons against corruption. This is a direct quote from Chief Justice. In most cases, the whistleblower has information that provides detailed insight into hitherto unsuspected criminality, which is not readily ascertained from routine inspection. This is confirmed by the ACFE, Association for Certified Fraud Examiners, in the State of the Nations report of 2022, where they found that 42% of all cases that were identified actually come from tip. It's tips that came from people just letting people know that something is going wrong. And if you look on the right-hand side, who are those people that give the tips? And 55% of those tips come from employees. So if you look at the ratio and the percentage of information that come through, valuable information, detailed information can be followed through. I mean, if you listen to Johan talk, he was inside the system. So when he talks, it's not a suspicion from somewhere that says, I think something's smelling. He says, here is the evidence. Evidence. I can back it up with evidence. This is the story behind the evidence. This is Ben doing wrong. This is Liesel doing X, Y, and Z, and then cahoots. And this is how the things fit together. And if you follow that, you will be able to identify and build a case very, very easily, as opposed to going from the outside into the system. Whistleblowers expose wrongdoing, and doing so benefit. And I'm talking your question. Why are they important? They benefit not themselves. When I talk about this, I'm talking about individuals, me as a citizen in society, organizations, which is businesses, both big and small, corporates, government departments, religious organizations. And the point that people forget is corruption has permeated every sector of society. It is not that the religious organization, or whether you're Jewish, Muslim, Christian, doesn't matter which, corruption has permeated every piece of society, including religion. So We need to fight this with everything in our beings. Impact is felt in. Now, we think that corruption is when you steal from the state. There's no, not culprit, the opposite. Everybody suffers because of this. And where it is felt in the organization, companies, product prices goes up because there are losses, they need to recover the losses. Service delivery, and here we can talk about quality and quantity. If you look at the water systems in South Africa, if you look at electricity, services have collapsed in South Africa because of corruption. And that has now been accepted by everybody in the country. So where in the past, we denied that we are responsible, we denied we're responsible, everybody has accepted that corruption has affected society as it is right now. Education, water, electricity, safety and security. Whistleblower is often an early warning system, as I've just mentioned previous 2 slides, that expose wrongdoing way before the problem escalates. One example is the whistleblower Matapelo More, who worked for Daybreak Farms, and Daybreak Farms is PIC funded. When the problem started a few years ago, it was less than 20 million. So she said, guys, there's something wrong here. She's the CFO or the financial controller. Something is wrong here. People said, get lost. And they continued. Today, the problem has escalated 200 million. And that is just one indication, one example of how things escalate if it is not addressed when you identify it as it starts. So when it starts, when it's born, we need to address that immediately. I want to end this part of my discussion and talk about the name of this presentation and the webinar. And when you shared it with me, I cringed because it is brutal, absolutely hard. But then I realized, but hang on, this is the truth. Snitches get stitches. And let's talk about the wording in those and just separate it. And I'd like to share some insight into that. A snitch means in the old days, you were either part of a gang or you were part of a mafia, etc. And a snitch was very harsh connotation. It means betrayal. It's negative. Lives are at risk and you're exposed to danger. That's snitch. If you think of the word, that's okay. Snitches, it's a definite threat. Unequivocal, you will get hurt. It's a warning that you will be injured and you will need medical assistance. So stitches mean that. And a ditch means, remember in the old days, we had gravel roads, no lighting. You will land up in a ditch means you will die. There was very little other connotation to you will die or you will go missing. And even in today's life, people go missing and they are never found. If you think about the apartheid days, there are still bodies that haven't been found, snitches that have disappeared. So in this context, that is the current connotation. And I'd like just to change the narrative as we move on to the next phase. And the whistleblower exposes wrongdoing. They bring wrongdoers to book. They stop financial bleeding, the leakages, and corruption. So they should be heroes, heroines. They should be celebrated and embraced. They should be rewarded. And in fact, absolutely celebrated and just embraced in South Africa. And I would like to play a major role in this journey as we change from the wording of this webinar to something where whistleblowers are absolutely celebrated and carried on our shoulders as heroes and heroines. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Ben. Thank you for that insight and taking us to a more positive narrative as it relates to whistleblowing and whistleblowers. And we will also touch on a few of the points that you have made. There's one that particularly to me stand out, and that is incentivizing whistleblowers. But we will get to that. Lulama, Ben has mentioned that in our country, in South Africa, and I believe in many other countries that are represented here today, that corruption has become the norm because, and I'm just now focusing on corruption and fraud, it has become the norm. And as we very well know, within an organizational context, if people don't speak up about what is wrong, as I've said in the beginning, what is wrong in the organization can just not do anything about it. Okay, and that is then it becomes the norm, as Ben has mentioned. So your focus is specifically on organizational ethics, and I use the name organizational so that, and not business, because we are talking about all organizations in whichever sector. And what I want to know, Lulama, is can organizations not ensure that their employees and other stakeholders, such as their suppliers, such as their clients, anyone who blows the whistle on misconduct in that organization, can I not ensure that these people are protected and listened to? That will also help. Okay, how can they create in an organization a safe space for whistleblowers to speak up?
Thank you so much, Liesel. It's whistleblowing in South Africa has got a very tough history, but from an organizational point of view, first thing that I find is for whistleblowing culture to take precedence, you need a healthy organizational ethical culture. So you need an organization that's not using words like so-called ethics, or where ethics is taboo, or people speak about ethics in the passages where they speak about ethics very openly. That's one of the founding and key cornerstones in terms of having a healthy whistleblowing culture. Then secondly, you need a comprehensive whistleblowing policy. I find that whistleblowing policies are either found in a code of conduct, sometimes in a conflict of interest as just a small little section, but they don't go into detail in terms of what it is and how it should be implemented in the organization. And then you also need to have trainers and awareness programs. So we tend to have a lot of ethics awareness programs and training around ethics, but we never do around whistleblowing. So we just leave it into the air. We draft our whistleblowing policy, and then it's left just like that. And then fourthly, we also need to look at, when organizations use a service provider for whistleblowing, they need to use a reputable one, okay? There's a lot of fly-by-night whistleblowing service providers out there, and it's important that you check their background and make sure that these people can actually deliver on the service that they said they're going to deliver on. And then fourthly, another thing that organizations don't do, which is, for me is the most important, is to do a risk assessment around a whistleblower. So, for instance, when a whistleblower reveals information or details, you need to first establish, when they've given you the information, is it easy to identify that whistleblower? Is it easy to tell where that information came from? Number two, you need to be able to tell in due course, will the whistleblower be found out? Will the whistleblower actually suffer occupational detriment? And then you also need to look at the manager themselves, the people that have been reported. Are they most likely going to take action against the whistleblower? What is the likelihood that the whistleblower will suffer occupational detriment because of what the managers know about them? So it's also important that you check what the managers are doing and sort of transfer them if you have to, but you need to protect the whistleblower. And then you also need to look at, is there a criminal element involved in there? Okay, if there's a criminal element involved in there, it's important that the relevant authorities are informed. And then a key thing for us, and this is where the whole thing about, is that a whistleblower is someone protecting themselves. If the whistleblower is involved in the very unethical conduct that they're reporting, then the dynamics change a little bit, and then you need to treat it a little bit differently. Then you also need to look at the relationship of the whistleblower with the manager, as well as the relationship of the whistleblower with the organization itself. And then lastly, you need to also look at keeping the information confidential and anonymous. And then you also have to look at other steps that you need to take. First one is you need to train managers, okay? So sometimes a whistleblowing report comes to a manager, but the manager is not trained or well-versed in whistleblowing and handling confidential information. So what they tend to do is they go and consult with everyone. Then the information gets out, and then everybody thinks the whistleblowing hotline is the one that gave away the information, but it's the manager inadvertently who was not aware that that they shouldn't be sharing this information. It should be kept very small until the investigation has been completed. Then you also need to train the employees, because employees also sometimes go about it the wrong way around. They use organizational equipment such as your company laptop, or they blow the whistle using the company telephone, or they even use their own personal cell phone. And one of the biggest things that employees tend to make a mistake on is actually talking about the very thing that they've reported. And the worst type you can find, I call them the chief mourner. These are the ones who go and blow the whistle and then they tell everybody in the organization about what just happened to them. So it's important that the employees are also trained on that. And then from the investigation point of view, it's important that we sort of keep these things independent. You know, you cannot say to the finance department, you've got a particular issue, and then ask the finance department to actually investigate. You need to make sure someone else who's not connected to the finance department is investigating the whistleblowing. And lastly, it's important that we need to keep it confidential. But that being said, Liesel, when it comes to a healthy whistleblowing culture, if you look at South Africa as a whole, we've got a very adversarial relationship with whistleblowing, and it dates all the way back to the 1700s with our second Cape governor called Willem van der Stel. For those of you who think it's familiar, that is the guy who Stellenbosch was named after. Okay, so what this guy did, he used company resources. He worked for the Dutch East India Company, and with those company resources, he used employees. He managed to get himself a nice wine farm. He had a lot of cattle, a lot of sheep. And one of the brave whistleblowers there, imagine that's all the way in the 1700s, blew the whistle on him, and they did what we love doing in South Africa. They had a commission of inquiry. Okay, so that the commissions of inquiry, we've been doing them since the 1700s. They slapped Willem van der Stel on the wrist, and he came back, but he sold his assets. But the first history, or the first case of occupational detriment, we can trace it all the way back to Aram Das, who was actually locked up in the Castle of Good Hope. And if anyone has been there, you can see it's not a nice place to be locked up in, okay? And that being said, Liesel, until we change societal views and societal relationship with whistleblowing, we won't see it trickle down into organizational ethics as well. So until we change our views on what whistleblowing is, it's going to be difficult for us to see a change also in the organizations as well. That being said, for all organizations that are here, I'd like to encourage you to download our whistleblowing toolkit. It's on our website. It's free. Don't worry, there's no hidden cost there. And I think it's a very good and useful practical tool in terms of how can you manage your whistleblowing hotlines and what other elements you should consider when you've got a whistleblowing hotline and management system. Thank you, Liesel.
Thank you, Lulama, for giving us that view of what an organization should do. And yeah, it's that difference between should and could and don't, isn't it? Yeah. I think there we still have a long way to go, but yeah, we believe it can be done. Johan, you have heard Lulama talking about whistleblowers who has been involved in unethical conduct or wrongdoing themselves. I have 2 points here that I want to make. The one is, do you view such a person as a whistleblower, or is it just a person reporting, someone who has been involved in the misconduct themselves? And then Lulama has also spoke about the detriments as well as Ben, that a whistleblower suffers. And I know, for instance, in your case, there's been 3 burglaries at your home at different times, some of them very well timed, or one of them at least. And so other than that, please tell us what I call the silent detriments. I don't know if that is a correct term, but I mean, it's been years. Where are we? 23 years? Please tell us how it has impacted your life, as well as perhaps those close to you.
Again, I would need a long period to.
Welcome.
Do that. But let me respond to you and challenge maybe a few concepts in the hope of maybe spurring some debate and thinking around some of these items. Firstly, I think, as Lulama has said, the activity of reporting wrongdoing or highlighting it once you become aware of it predates the term whistleblower by far. So I think it requires some thinking on whether the term whistleblower requires better definition and whether it should include people who were beneficiaries of the wrongdoing or potentially even participants and who at the later stage, more for self-preservation than for any other motive, decide to speak up. Not that I'm diminishing the value of such testimony and evidence, but I do think, there are two schools of thought. There's the one school of thought that lumps everybody of any category, whether they were beneficiaries or whether they accidentally come across wrongdoing, into the term whistleblower, versus the other school of thought that makes that distinction. That you perhaps become what's known as a state witness or a Crown's witness, versus somebody who voluntarily reports something that they happen to come across. So that's the one concept that I think requires some debate and consideration. The other one is speaks more to Ben's presentation. And that's this notion that people who report wrongdoing voluntarily are deemed snitches or rats or outcasts. I would challenge that. I think there are many facets to this, but first of all, I think in a general sense, the people who tend to see whistleblowers as snitches or rats and threats and bad people are precisely the people that the whistle is being blown upon. I don't think that the general populace ordinarily would consider somebody who reports wrongdoing, whether it's corruption, fraud, or any other type of wrongdoing, as a snitch. I don't think so. I would challenge that notion. But what I do think happens, and that speaks to the consequences of whistleblowing, is that often when you blow the whistle against powerful people or people with resources that enable them to threaten you or harm you or those close to you and try to squash you and shut you down, there's this thing almost like the bullying effect. Other people, good people around you, tend to isolate you because they become afraid of getting drawn into the fray. And so that's an indirect consequence, certainly something that I experienced, is that the minute that they came for me, people who I have known for 16 years as colleagues suddenly disappeared out of my life overnight. And I had not spoken to many of them for many, many, many years until the truth surfaced. And then some of them had felt a bit more comfortable to engage with me and speak to me. But at the time when this happened, I was completely isolated. I was alone. I was on my own. So that speaks to, I think, this notion of being an outcast and a snitch. I don't think any of those people that stayed away from me or avoided me considered me as a snitch. I just think they were afraid of getting drawn into the fray and suffering the same kind of harm that I was suffering at the time, which began with an immense public onslaught to attack my character. And then later on, I think it became worse. The threats came, direct threats, phone calls from people. People saying to me, in fact, I received a WhatsApp from a gangster. He was that brazen to tell me, my end is near. And from state security agency people who called me. And that sort of, it became worse and worse. Then came the robberies, the invasion of my privacy. And then later on, the state machinery was, because it had been captured by then, was then repurposed with a view to further try and diminish us and take us out of the equation and silence our voices. Simultaneously, there were these so-called inquiries, which none of them actually called me in to say, listen, what's your side of the story? And to the extent that I did have an ability to engage with them and put to them the evidence, when you read their so-called reports, it's as if nothing that I'd given them ever existed. In one case, the Inspector General of Intelligence, everything I'd given them disappeared, mysteriously, just disappeared. So, and lost, and nobody to date has explained where it's gone. You know, it's never seen light of day. So I think this concept of impimpi, snitch, rat is something I think we need to also debate and think about. Who are whistleblowers rats to? I don't think the general population at all. I think many people do think we are heroes, which brings me to the last notion that I'd like to challenge, and that is, I think, you know, the act of going along in your life happily and then stumbling across evidence or information of something wrong, and then responding to it by making it known to authorities with a view to try and stop it or have it addressed, is a very natural human action. It's ordinary. It's not heroic. It's ordinary. And it should be ordinary. The question I always pose is, if you're walking down the street and you see somebody else across the street about to fall into a ditch, what are you going to do? Stand and watch them fall in the ditch? Or are you going to step across the road and tell them, be careful, don't fall into the ditch? And so for me, that's also something that I think requires a bit of thinking and debate around, because to me, it's the perfectly normal thing to do, certainly in my case. But the difference is this, is that when you do that, you often don't realize and consider the consequences. In some cases, the consequences may be exactly that what you hope. So you go and report wrongdoing to the authorities, and there are good examples of that. And then there are also instances where, in fact, it backfires on you. But that's something that occurs post facto. It does not occur at the time when you just naturally respond to the knowledge of wrongdoing. Let me leave it there. I mean, the consequences to whistleblowers are well documented. You know, your life changes permanently, forever, for the rest of your life, dramatically so, on all levels, and you will never be the same person again.
Thank you, Johan. Yeah, you have given us a number of challenges here, which I quite like, and things that areas that we need to discuss further. The one thing that while you were talking, I was thinking that, all right, this negative use of snitches and rats and traitors and all of those things, it is perhaps something, a narrative that is more, or words that are more promoted by ourselves as maybe some practitioners, and then organizations specifically, and perhaps the media. And we need to find alternative descriptions. Okay, you have mentioned a couple of important things that I will touch on a little bit as we go on. Hopefully, there are a number of questions coming through, and Ben, but before we get to the questions, I want to ask you, Jóhannes mentioned some of the things that, some of the detriments and consequences that goes with being a whistleblower, and also the point that to him it came naturally, or it will come naturally, to report on wrongdoing. There is a study, experiment, not just experiment. There was a case many years ago. They call it the Genovese effect. It's a bystander effect, where I speak a little bit under correction, where 37 neighbors of Miss Genevieve saw how she is being attacked, and none of them did anything. They looked out of the window and none of them did anything. So I want to know your opinion, Ben. from the Whistleblower House's perspective, have people come to the fore? Are there only whistleblowers are the only whistleblowers that we know of, people that we read in the media, high-profile whistleblowers such as Johan, such as many of the other people that have been mentioned worldwide, people like Snowden, people like Jóhannes Stefánsson, who reported on huge corruption and, in South Africa's case, state capture. But at the Whistleblower House, has anyone come to the fore? Are we helping people? And then with what kind of services do they ask most?
Thank you. The names that I mentioned is probably 5% of people that come forward, and then they become publicly known. The reality is there are many, many other people that do blow the whistle. They're under the radar. Bear in mind that the Whistleblower House is not as well known as what you think it should be, because we don't go out and market ourselves. We kind of offer services. We are available on the web. We're available for people to ask for help, and we help people. But we are not as well known as what we'd like to be. I think we are much less known as people like Corruption Watch, etc., because we're not in the media all the time. But to give you some sense, at the end of July, a few days ago, we had 187 whistleblowers talking to us and getting our ask for services, etc. Of those, and this gives you an idea of the need, where the needs are that whistleblowers need. 166 actually need legal advice, either before or after blowing the whistle. So there's a very high percentage that actually need legal advice. 84 needs counseling of the 187. That is extremely high as well. Bearing in mind that South Africa as a group, and we speak to the Psychological Society of Africa. We had Professor Seth Cooper on this platform where we spoke about how South Africa and South Africans as a whole are traumatized. So the whistleblower forms part of that cohort, but they are more traumatized because of what they go through. And 84 of the 187 need psychological services, which we provide. 50 ask for safety and security because they believe their lives are in danger. And we go through a process to evaluate what that means and exactly what they need. Because sometimes people think they are being followed, but it's coincidence. Other times there are real threats, and then we address that, etc. And then 16 needed financial assistance. Those are people that have lost their jobs. They can't keep the kids in school. They're about to lose their houses. They can't pay for just amenities, electricity and water, and they are hungry. So that gives you some indication of the need that whistleblowers have, and then where the major need is in that. People are traumatized. They need legal help because the PDA is new in South Africa. There are not many, and there's a question that I just want to answer while I'm on this topic. Should we be doing training for labor people in the lawyers, CCMA, labor court? Absolutely. The difficulty we have is the PDA right now is being reviewed, rewritten completely. So we need to educate the legal environment when it comes to the rights and what is expected of the whistleblower, but we also need to take a long-term view that we need to start working with society so that rats and snitches and those kind of words are not acceptable. So when somebody calls somebody a rat, your colleague, your neighbor, your church congregant should call them out and say, that's not acceptable. These people are doing it for society, so just shut up. There's a couple of strong words I can put in there. People that know me know how I talk. I want to give them a clap. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. All right, Ben made reference to the PDA, which is the Protected Disclosures Act in South Africa. And there's a question. I see Lulama's hand is up, and it will be great. I assume, Lulama, you want to say something on what Ben has said. And then I also want to ask you, it's a question from, I think it's a question from Devisham that says, what is your view? It's a panel question, but what is your view on internal reporting? We know that currently the Protected Disclosures Act says one must first exhaust internal reporting mechanisms before reporting outside of the organization. And we also know for our international guests, the Protected Disclosures Act in South Africa is undergoing this consultation on how it should be amended to actually really protect whistleblowers. Whether it will be able to do so, we are yet to see. Lulama, your opinion on internal reporting, please. And then I took it that you wanted to say something on what Ben has said.
Thanks, Liesl. The hand went up accidentally. I was switching my phone to, because we had load shedding. So, you know, we all know that ESCOM problem. Okay. Yeah. From an internal reporting perspective, I think the one thing we don't consider, especially as organizations, is we don't look at the role of middle management in organizations. And middle management plays a very important role in reporting of issues, as well as the management of the details and the information there. And let me maybe go into a little more detail. If you look at, when we look at an ethical culture, we see the tone from the top managers, from the executives, and then very little from middle management. And we don't empower those middle managers to become informed in terms of what it is that we're looking for from an ethical culture and how it is that we can improve our ethical culture. So more often than not, you find, no shade to anybody, but you find a guy from primary school and high school, they used to hang out in the library and all they did was study. They get to university, they pass summa cum laude, and then they get into their workspace and they're excellent at it. And then suddenly they're promoted to middle management, but they've got the same people skills as Steven Seagal. Okay, so zero personality skills, and that's how they manage their employees. Now, whistleblowing happens, and this employee doesn't want to be involved in any issues, and they don't want to rattle the cage. Now, the problem that we have in organizations is we don't give managers at all levels a way out. And I think Johan mentioned it very earlier on, to say that most people don't believe in snitches, and it's a very human thing to become defensive. So we don't empower managers to say, listen, if you are faced with a case such as this one, these are the options that you have, and these are some of the things that you should start doing to investigate the case. And also, you don't have to push back and defend off the bat, but you can actually, there's ways of you defending the issue, investigating the so-called case and finding out what is it that we can do to sort of get to the bottom of this without you feeling like you're being attacked. So it's important that managers don't feel attacked when a safe reporting case comes out. So that's the first one. And then with the Protected Disclosures Act, it's a very good act. It's a good case. And just to answer Ms. Moodley's question, it's a good act. But unfortunately, we've seen that acts really become robust when they are followed by more regulations. So we haven't really given enough thought to it. If you look at the PFMA has got a lot of instructions from Treasury. You get a lot of instructions from the Auditor General, until the PDA Act has also got a lot of instructions in terms of these are the recommendations. This is how we recommend that you should implement certain issues. We're not going to see much of a change. It's just an act that's there. It's almost like a tick box, but we haven't really figured out the nitty-gritties and how to actually manage it in practical senses. And also, we're not seeing enough whistleblowing awareness training and enough whistleblowing implementation plans within organizations. It's not seen as part of the strategy. It's a reactive thing. It's not being managed in a proactive manner. So yeah, I'd like to park it there.
Thank you. Yeah, it's always reactive. It should be proactive. And I agree completely with your middle managers that need to have that exposure to training on how to handle confidential information, how to keep the identity of the whistleblower confidential. We saw in a study that the Ethics Institute did in 2019 that 42% of employees reported to their middle managers or their direct line managers, whereas only 2% reported to their internal hotline or whistleblowing facilities. Thank you. There are questions, and one of it has to do with incentivizing whistleblowers. And I want to put this to all three of you, Johan and Ben as well, please. We saw that the Security Exchange in the United States paid $721 million US in 2022 to whistleblowers. Now, we know this is only applicable to certain financial crimes. The United Kingdom are also incentivizing certain circumstances, and then in the comments that have been given, I think some of the comments that have been given now in South Africa on the Department of Justice's recommendations for enhancement of our Protected Disclosures Act, there is an opinion, or there is recommendations that a whistleblower fund be established. Johan, what is your view on incentivizing whistleblowers? Wouldn't it undermine the morality of a whistleblower?
Yeah, Liesel, I think there appears to be two primary schools of thought on this. One being, for rewarding in financial terms, and then the other one not. I'm inclined to veer towards the no reward, for the simple reason that what I said earlier on, I think it's a perfectly natural thing. We should expect it of each other to, when we go about our normal daily life and we see something wrong, that we should report it to the authorities and expect the authorities to respond to that. And that should be normalized. It should not be treated as something extraordinary or unique. I'm concerned that it may turn the notion of doing the right thing from a value perspective into some form of bounty hunting. That worries me a little bit. But having said that, I do think one should look at cases individually, because there may well be scenarios where some form of recognition may well be justified. And there are many things that jump to mind when I say that. And so I wouldn't absolutely dismiss it. But I don't think that finances, a financial reward, is per se the default automatic general response to somebody who's done what I think we should all naturally do.
Well, thank you for that input. So let's hear, Ben, from your side. What is your view? Should we or shouldn't we incentivize whistleblowers?
I just want to clarify before I do that. You spoke two things as if it's one. A fund should be created.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay,
and I just want to clarify that the fund is not meant as an incentive. It is to make sure that when a whistleblower blows the whistle and they get fired, they have an income. So that fund is what the intention there is to ensure that the whistleblower can survive, they've got an income, etc. But remember, the current environment when it comes to witness protection is absolutely not conducive to whistleblowing at all. And I know that I don't want to confuse whistleblowing to witness, but you've got to bear in mind that the witness protection environment is a very clinical environment where they put you in protection, and what happens, and I don't want to go into detail, but it's very lonely there. And the idea of that where we're moving towards with whistleblowing is that you should not be lonely. And it's much deeper than just having a quick conversation that says things must happen. We need to change the culture in South Africa. And we are talking to organizations such as the religious organization, government, that speaks to the culture of whistleblowing, where people, deep-seated, we have cultural problems in Africa, and we need to go understand that before we start talking whistleblower as one portion of that. But we need to change the environment in Africa where we have become a very violent society. That needs to be addressed. Corruption is rife. We need to address that. So it is not only the whistleblower, but we need to have a societal reboot to do that. We have not, and myself and Johan speak quite regularly, and as you can hear, the two of us speak robustly about the topics that we speak about. We as a whistleblower house have not made a final decision whether to do it or not, because you have the tensions. We believe that the option should be there, but once the option is there, you can't take it away. Now, then you have to put criteria in, and potentially that would help. But I just wanted to make sure that you understand that audience around the table understand there are two discussions. The one is a fund that speaks to supporting whistleblowers in their time of need as they move forward, versus the compensation that you get 3 or 5 or 10% from any monies that be recouped.
Which is then mostly after the fact. Lulama, your opinion?
Okay, in between the two opinions that were expressed here. So I think the first one is the whistleblower needs to be compensated for any financial losses they may have suffered. And then I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to compensate them for a bare minimum. Like it should be a minimum threshold to say that this is for the psychological effects and all the occupational detriment that they suffered. So this is just a small amount that is awarded to them. And then I do worry about the bounty hunting, because there will be people who become professional whistleblowers. They move from organization to organization and somehow they expose wrongdoing and get rewarded. So that's also another thing that I'm a bit wary of. And of course, you know, we can't forget the country that we live in. Last thing we want to see is 10 million rand disappears from whistleblowing fund. That is a very real risk, because we've seen it happen in all organizations. So we need to be very cognizant of where the fund resides, who are the people who are going to be looking after the fund, and what is the fund going to be used for, and how is it going to be dispersed. If we don't agree on that, then I think we're going to see more of the same, because how many anti-corruption and ethical departments do we see, but nothing gets done, especially if the fund is not given any teeth in terms of disbursements. Then it could go the other way around.
Well, thank you. And we've heard now two different opinions, like you say, in between. Yeah, I'm also this way or that way. It depends, I suppose. And I know at the SEC, apparently there has been some people who have become sort of career whistleblowers, according to some reports, who go out to find something to blow the whistle so that they can get they can get some rewards. Now, in terms, I have to come back to South Africa at the moment, what is, as panel again, what is your opinion in terms of, should there be an independent, should we establish in South Africa an independent and dedicated anti-corruption structure? This was recommended by Chief Justice Zondo. And in some countries, there are such structures. Maybe we can hear see in the chat whether those structures have been successful. From what I read in terms of certain ones, it has not been successful because it has been infiltrated, so to speak, by some characters intent of making some money out of it. Or should we go for a Chapter 9 institution in South Africa? Or should we just rely on corporates and the public service to make sure that their whistleblowing management is of such nature that our whistleblowers are not victimized, that are encouraged, that the employees, the stakeholders, also external stakeholders are encouraged to blow the whistle for the right reasons? Johan?
Yeah, well, I think the world gives us some examples of this. The developed world tends to favor dedicated structures and bodies that manage and handle and take ownership of the concept of whistleblowing in their societies. And even in some developing countries, you have that. I think from a South African perspective, I think our track record when it comes to creating organizations and new bodies and new institutions and new departments is not that great. So I'm uncertain whether the solution lies in immediately jumping to creating a new body. at this stage. I think fundamentally and ultimately it should exist. But I think to begin with, the question should be, where in government or elsewhere does the ownership of whistleblowing and whistleblowers lay? Now, that's where I disagree with Lumalu, because I don't think the Protected Disclosures Act is worth the paper it's written on. There are not even punitive consequences to people who cause harm to whistleblowers in that act. So I think, and I don't know who owns whistleblowers. Where do whistleblowers go when they have a problem? Where do we go? Who should we complain to? I mean, in my case, you know, I went as high up as the presidency. I spoke to members of parliament. I went to the public protector. I spoke to my employer. I spoke to heads of other departments in the police, Directorate of Priority Crimes, and so on. Not a single one of them heard me. So I think fundamentally for me, it's about ownership. Where does that rest? Once you have established statutory ownership of whistleblowing, the concept, then as we are a developing state and a constitutional democracy, the mechanism by which you take ownership and manage that ownership can develop organically. Like I think we've seen with institutions that do work, as opposed to ones that come about on the back of an idea only. You know, it tends to distract us. We focus more on who's going to head it, what's the budget going to be, what officers do they use, what are their powers, who do they report to, et cetera, and it completely distracts from, you know, it'll take too long, actually. Yeah.
Yes. No, and we know it takes forever, basically. You're quite right there. The focus is completely wrong with these organizations. Thank you, Jan. Ben?
The difficulty we have is that we put structures in place so that accountability and reporting and watchdog, all those things are in place. The difficulty we have is the actual work behind that stands behind that. And very little accountability is being seen in South Africa. If you look at over the recent years, SSA, what oversight bodies took place over there and what happened. The amount of corruption that was reported to Parliament. More than one whistleblower has spoken to us, the way Jóhannes just said. I wrote to the President, I wrote to the Parliamentary Oversight Committee, I wrote to the Minister, and they just get ignored because there are other powers at play that stop accountability of taking place. And so it doesn't help you put structures in place if you don't adhere to the rules and regulations that you put in place for that. And in fact, you need to hold people to account every day. You can't pick and choose that you want to hold Lisa to account, but Ben can get away with murder. Everybody should be held to the same level. And we need to hold people to account and ensure that accountability is done properly. And so that people they can feel what happens. The sad thing is, and I need to put it on the table, we shouldn't shy away from it. The Zondo Commission made very strong recommendations. He found quite a number of people that have cases to answer for. How many of those people have been put into positions over the last 2 years of power, of very high profile environment? And what does that say about how serious government is taking the Zondo Commission recommendations and the statements and utterances he made? Because if you continue appointing people into positions of power, despite having a cloud hanging over your head, you are not serious. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Lulama, just there's still a few questions that I want for us to deal with. So just hang in there for a moment. One thing just for our international audience is we are talking about the Zondo Commission and what this commission was looking into state capture specifically. And as at the end of the day, it made a number of recommendations, especially in terms of and the test of most of our whistleblowers, or many of the people that has been in the media as whistleblowers in South Africa, testified at the Zondo Commission. And the findings pointed to the fact that there are people in very high positions that needs to be held accountable, which has not been happening at all. So I think as panel members, you will agree with me that we have a problem in our country. And I know in some other countries as well, where people have spoken up about huge, high levels of corruption, that the perpetrators are not held accountable, but instead they get new positions and increases and salaries and so on. Just a last question, Lulama, to you from our Q&A session here is there's a comment by Deon that talks about, before we can even look at the Protected Disclosures Act, we need to understand what are the statistics in the country. How many whistleblowers do we have? What are the things that they blow the whistle on? In your opinion, is that something that we should focus on, or should we perhaps rather focus on how we can increase or create those safe spaces where people can actually blow the whistle and where they will be protected, not only by the organization, but eventually by the law? Because I think most of us agree with Johan that the current law is not worth the paper that it is written on. You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Lisa. If you look at how this has played out in the public discourse, I don't even think it's worth looking at the statistics, because it's just going to discourage people even more. I think what we need to look at is publishing those cases where whistleblowing was successfully investigated, it was managed well, and they came to a conclusion, and the whistleblower was actually given feedback. And then maybe we can start learning from there in terms of what is it that we can do going forward as organization, and what are some of the good examples that we've seen from a governance point of view. I think I've hit that under 1 minute.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Lulama. All right, one last word, please. Just some advice, some encouragement from each of you. Johan, your last profound statement.
I don't know about that, but look, I think, in the end, we all have to live with our own consciences. And so when we go about life, in all ways, where we come across something that's wrong and it causes harm to people and in the environment and society, do not hesitate to make it known. And the purpose of making it known should be to put a stop to it and hold people to account. It doesn't matter what follows, because in the long run, I think that's just the state of flux. In the long run, things will come right. But if you hesitate and you stop and you don't do anything, you're not just harming society and the environment and the public, but also future generation.
Thank you. Thanks. Positive words. Ben? Lulama?
Whistleblowers are needed, not only in South Africa, but worldwide. What is needed is to change the environment so that they can come forward, so that they are protected, so that they are calibrated, all the other words. There's not enough time for me to tell you how I feel about this topic, but they are needed, and we are ready to work towards this. Bear in mind that the one thing I want to encourage people, the deadline for submissions to the Department of Justice was last week on Tuesday. There will be another opportunity, because once they draft the legislation, they have to come out again for new comments, etc. And I would like to encourage people to use that opportunity, because it's only with our participation that our future will be crafted. We cannot stand here and say, they should have. we must contribute to that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Lulama, 30 seconds.
Thank you. I think for potential whistleblowers and future whistleblowers, not reporting on unethical conduct is not an option. If you've seen unethical conduct, you must report on it. But I would like to encourage you to first do your homework, get advice from the different spheres of governance, from legal, from a finance perspective, as well as the criminal element of it. But make sure that you're covered. Put your safety first before you go out and blow the whistle. And once you've done it, word of advice, shush. Okay, yeah. Shush until it's resolved.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this discussion. I am going to hand over to the chairperson of the Whistleblower House, for which we are most thankful for his leadership. Ivan, if you can perhaps just close the session for us, and perhaps open your webcam.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. Good days to all the participants. I see it's above 200 now. Let me first thank the panelists, Johan, Ben, and Lulama. A special thank you to Lisa and Professor Deon Rossouw for opening the webinar. And of course, for all the technical support. Lisa has done a good job a very, very good job in the discussion. So I'm going to avoid talking about the content of the discussions. I want to make just 2 points, and then I end. The one is that we're operating in a context, and all the participants have made reference to that. And that whilst we should do everything to support whistleblowers and encourage them, we've got to impact on society as a whole. And in this context, just one thing that I want to say is that elections are coming up next year. A question we should ask ourselves, the participants, the Ethics Institute and the Whistleblower House, is how do we put this issue onto the election platforms? We have an opportunity, and we should think very seriously about this. And what is more, we should put it on, we should be asking the key players in the elections, what are you going to do about this concretely, practically? Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the participants, and well done.